told someone something you cannot take back. Maybe recently, maybe years ago. A confession, an overshare, a piece of yourself that you handed to someone before you had decided to. And the moment it left you, the moment it was out in the air between you and another person, you knew you had made a mistake. Not because what you said was false, because it was true, and you said it anyway. Fyodor Dostoevsky spent his entire literary career studying the mechanism behind that moment, not the content of confession, the compulsion, the specific, irrational, self-defeating drive to tell the thing that should not be told to the wrong person, at the wrong moment, with the full knowledge that it will cost you something. His conclusion was not that confession is weakness. His conclusion was that confession is a need, and that needs, when they are not understood, do not disappear. They find their own way out. Dostoevsky is not a psychologist. He is something more precise. A novelist who treated his characters as laboratories, extreme situations, extreme psychologies, pressed until the mechanism at the center broke open and became visible. And the mechanism Dostoevsky returned to, in novel after novel, character after character, was guilt. Specifically, what guilt does to a person who refuses to name it, who suppresses it, who maintains the performance of innocence or normalcy or fine. His observation, which preceded clinical psychology by decades and has since been confirmed by it, was that suppressed guilt does not resolve. It accumulates. And it accumulates with a specific telos. It is always moving toward confession, not because confession is moral, not because the person has decided that honesty is the right course, but because the psyche has a structural need for what confession provides. Dostoevsky called it the need for the witness, the specific relief that comes not from speaking the thing, but from having it heard, from having the internal become external, from having the private knowledge become shared. The person who confesses is not primarily seeking absolution. They are seeking reality confirmation. They need to know that what they carry is real, that it exists outside them as well as inside, that the weight of it is not a private hallucination, that someone else now knows, that someone else now carries even a small fraction of what I have been carrying alone. This is why confession is so rarely strategic, why it arrives at the wrong moment, to the wrong person, with a force that is disproportionate to the relationship or the context. Because the compulsion is not rational, it is structural. It is the psyche attempting to discharge what it can no longer hold privately. And Dostoevsky's darkest observation was this: the confession rarely provides what the compulsion was seeking, but the compulsion returns. And the next confession is always larger. The most documented case study of the confession compulsion in all of literature is Rodion Raskolnikov, the protagonist of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. A man who commits a serious act and then spends the remainder of the novel being destroyed not by external consequence, but by the internal pressure of what he has not confessed. Raskolnikov does not fear punishment. He fears the private knowledge. He fears being the only person in the world who knows what he has done. The isolation of guilt, the specific loneliness of carrying something that cannot be shared, becomes more unbearable than any external consequence could be. This is Dostoevsky's first and most important observation. Guilt is not primarily a moral experience. It is a relational one. The suffering of guilt is the suffering of isolation. The sense that something true about you exists in a sealed interior that no one else can access. And the compulsion to confess is the compulsion to break that seal, to allow the interior to become exterior, to be known, even if being known is dangerous, Raskolnikov begins to confess before he intends to. He talks about his act in the abstract, philosophically, as a thought experiment. To people who do not know he has done it, he is testing the seal, finding out if the knowledge can survive partial exposure. It cannot. Each partial confession increases the pressure rather than relieving it. This is the second observation. Partial confession does not satisfy the compulsion. It intensifies it. The person who hints, who implies, who tells the edge of the thing without telling the center, is not releasing pressure. They are testing whether full release is survivable. And each test that does not result in catastrophe moves them closer to the full confession. I told them part of it and nothing happened. I could tell them more. Maybe I should tell them all of it. The third example is the one that closes the distance between Raskolnikov and the viewer entirely. You have done this. Not the extreme version, the ordinary one. The thing you told someone that you had not planned to tell, that arrived in the middle of a conversation about something else, that came out before the managing part of you had time to stop it. And afterward, in the gap between the confession and their response, you wondered why you said it. You knew why you said it. You had needed to say it for longer than you had been admitting. Dostoevsky's framework says that moment was not an accident. It was the compulsion finding its moment. The guilt, or the shame, or the secret, or the thing that has been living in the sealed interior. Finally locating a crack in the container and taking it. The confession was always coming. You just did not know it yet. Think about the last thing you confessed, not the small admissions. The one that cost you something. The one that changed what someone knew about you, or what you knew about yourself. Think about the moment just before it, the internal state. The specific pressure that had been building, for how long you would rather not calculate. And that found, in that particular conversation with that particular person, its particular opening. And you took it because you had been waiting for it, even though you did not know you were waiting. Dostoevsky's framework asks you to identify what was in the sealed interior. Not what you said. What it was that had been held for long enough to need saying. Because the confession is always a symptom. The thing confessed is not the thing that needed relief. The thing that needed relief was the isolation of carrying it, the specific loneliness of knowing something about yourself that no one else knew, something that made you feel like a version of yourself that did not match the version everyone else was responding to. Think about who you confess to. Dostoevsky was precise about the choice of confessor. It is rarely random. The person you choose, consciously or not, tells you something about what the confession was actually for. A person confesses to someone they trust in order to be absolved. A person confesses to someone they do not trust in order to be punished. A person confesses to someone who has no power over them in order to discharge the pressure without consequence. A person confesses to someone who has maximum power over them in order to force a resolution they cannot produce themselves. Who did you tell? And what did you need them to do with it? Jung would call this shadow eruption. Dostoevsky calls it something more specific. He calls it the need for the witness that the self cannot be. You cannot hear your own confession. You cannot receive it. You cannot confirm for yourself that what you carry is real and that carrying it is not your fault. So you find someone else to do it, even when they cannot, even when telling them costs you more than carrying it did. Think about the thing you are currently carrying, the thing that has been in the sealed interior long enough to have weight, long enough to be looking for its moment, long enough that you have started to think about who you might tell, even though you know you shouldn't. Even though you know what it will cost, even though you have had this thought before and chosen not to act on it and it came back. Dostoevsky's observation is not that you will confess. His observation is that you already are. In the partial tells, in the hints, in the conversations that circle it without landing. In this one, he believed it was evidence of something deeply human. The need to be known, not admired, not approved of, known. In his framework, the person who cannot confess, who has suppressed their guilt so completely that the compulsion has no channel, is not in a safer position than the person whose confession is ungoverned. They are in a more dangerous one, because the pressure continues to build without release, and it will find release, not in the form of a chosen confession, in the form of a behavior. The self-sabotage that creates the consequence that produces the exposure. Raskolnikov's compulsion to confess is not weakness. It is the psyche's most fundamental demand, to be witnessed, to have the interior confirmed as real, to not be alone with what you know about yourself. Dostoevsky's clinical insight, embedded in fiction because fiction could reach places clinical language could not, was that guilt needs a witness. Not a judge, a witness. The person who confesses to the wrong confessor at the wrong moment is not acting irrationally. They are acting urgently. The need has exceeded the capacity to manage it. And urgency in the human psyche does not wait for the right conditions. What Dostoevsky proposed, and what the century of psychology that followed him confirmed, is that the confession compulsion can be made conscious. Not eliminated, made conscious. The person who understands what the compulsion is actually seeking, not release, but witness, can begin to ask a different question. Not, should I tell this person? But, what do I actually need from them? And whether this is the person who can give it. That question does not stop the compulsion. Nothing stops it. But it can redirect it toward a confession that serves the need rather than simply discharging it, toward a witness rather than a judge, toward a person who can hear what you carry without making it heavier. You told someone something you cannot take back. Now you know what you were looking for when you did. The question Dostoevsky left open, the one he never answered in any of his novels, is whether you found it. The other direction is inward. Dostoevsky documented something more pervasive than the compulsion to confess, the way guilt shapes every decision a person makes long after the original act has been forgotten. The invisible hand that makes you say yes when you mean no, that makes you shrink in rooms where you should expand, that produces a life organized around a debt you cannot identify and cannot pay. Why guilt controls your every decision. That is next.